In this conversation, I chat to Justin and Jackie from the Flow Consciousness Institute. And so we dive into the topic of flow as a state of ultimate connection with oneself and with the world around us. We explore the idea of struggle flow and effortless flow and the inherent paradox within flow. Talk about intuition and strengthening our ability to listen to intuition and also to trust our intuition, maybe even more so. And then we also talk about group flow and how we can balance the need for structure and also the need for spontaneity as facilitators, as leaders, aiming to create social spaces that are conducive to creativity and well-being. So buckle in and get ready to flow with myself, Jackie and Justin. Grab a tea, take a breath, notice the inhale, the exhale, and the space between. A moment in between moments. Here you are. You're listening to Spaces Between with your friend and host, L. Jeffrey. An open exploration into restoring connection in the 21st century in our personal lives, our relations, and our communities. What does it mean to live in relationship to the wholeness of who we are together? I'm not one for ads and am one for creating something beautiful with others, in this case, you. So if you enjoy our time together, I do invite you to subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, rate and leave a review for the show. And if you're feeling super generous and fueled and filled up by our conversations, you might even consider donating or soon joining my Patreon membership. Just visit www.spacesbetweenpodcast.com, where you'll also find show notes and other useful links and resources following these conversations. So this is it. Let's dive in. Brilliant. I think I've only been doing the podcast for maybe 3 weeks now, which has been, it started just from me wanting to have an excuse to have conversation with wonderful people. And yeah, it's like, who do I want to chat to? Great. Invite them on.
Awesome.
And if people enjoy it, brilliant. Really nice for them. But for me, it's just
it's all for you. I love it.
Yeah. Own it. But no, really inquiry led. So I just love the conversations where we're so okay with not having the answer. And so, yeah, let's just see how confused we can make people at the end, but how normal we can have them feel in their confusion, essentially.
Beautiful.
Great. So, Jackie and Justin, thanks for joining me for a conversation.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, a pleasure.
Nice. Yeah, just as a matter of context before we kick in, where are you joining us from? Where in the world?
I'm in Los Angeles.
Yeah, and I'm in a nice little corner of Santa Barbara called Toro Canyon. Let's get specific here.
Great. Cool. And I suppose it's worthy to note before we dive in that we are recording this April 2020 amidst COVID-19, a moment, a segment of time that we will all likely remember for the rest of our lives at least. And also to note that everything we talk about, while some of it might be directly related to our experience during COVID, that it's directly related to our lives. In my perspective, this experience of COVID and the kind of experience of rapid change and prolonged uncertainty is really just a bit of a test tube for the nature of our lives itself, which is change and uncertainty. And so whatever we talk about here is just like a really great playground for exploring, I suppose, capacities and ways of relating that will hopefully, and well, actually most definitely, support us in the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start just with a poem, which will kind of maybe frame the conversation around flow and intuition and wherever we end up taking it. And then after the poem, I suppose I'm curious to hear how it speaks to you and what it means to you, just as a way of also for people to get to understand your position, your worldview, and your vantage point. So I'll read the poem. Feel free to just close your eyes and bathe in it as well. So it's Illusion by Margaret Wheatley. Too much of our action is really reaction. Such doing does not flow from free and independent hearts, but depends on external provocation. Such doing does not flow, it depends on external provocation. It does not come from our sense of who we are and what we want to do, but from our anxious reading of how others define us, our anxious reading of how others define us, and of what the world demands. When we react in this way, we do not act humanly. The true professional is one who does not obscure grace with illusions of technical prowess. The true professional is one who strips away all illusions to reveal a reliable truth in which the human heart can rest. Unveil the illusions that masquerade, the illusions that masquerade as reality, and reveal the reality behind the mask. Catch the magician deceiving us, get a glimpse of the truth behind the trick, a glimpse. Contemplation happens anytime we get a glimpse of the truth. All right.
Wow,
Straight to
potent.
truth.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's very, very apropos for this conversation, what's going on in the world, everything.
Uh-huh. Yeah, so I
Defined.
suppose off the back of that, I mean, we're going to highly likely mention the word flow quite often in this conversation. So for you personally, so just to begin with, get your personal, I suppose, stories and ways of making meaning. How did you come to this work of flow? And what does flow mean to you now? So why flow, and what do you mean by flow when you mention the word flow?
Yeah. So I came to flow intentionally and accidentally. I think, you kind of hit a point where you realize that there is such a thing, and then all of a sudden it becomes the only thing. And my journey into flow was really like throughout my whole life, I've kind of just defaulted to doing what felt right. And, that's in part because my parents, were not trying to force me into any boxes. And in fact, they were working a lot. So I was left to my own devices without a lot of guidance as to what to do or not to do. And I just kind of intuitively figured, well, if I could do anything I want, I might as well do what I enjoy doing. And that process of doing that over the course of my life eventually led me to start to have some pretty powerful experiences when I was around like 25, 26. And mainly in relation to being mentored by certain people. There's like a string of synchronicities that led me to get really incredible mentors that came into my life who were really, shining examples of what was possible living in flow. I didn't even call it flow at that point in my life. I didn't really have a concept of it, but there was the people that I was being mentored by and I was studying with were living on a completely different level of reality than everyone else. Like just absolutely living on completely outside of the matrix, completely outside of like all the social rules. And they were aware that they were doing it too. They had mastery over it and they knew they had a context for it. And so, I became fascinated with it after working with them, and they could not explain it to the degree that was satisfactory to me. I really wanted to know like the nitty gritty mechanics of how flow operated and how one could live in these expanded states of consciousness and what was actually happening under the surface and all this stuff. And so that set me on an epic journey to kind of decode the mechanics of flow, and not just flow states, but flow consciousness, which are two ends of the same spectrum. And I guess this kind of weaves into my answer for that, which is really, flow states. If you look at states and stages, right, using to reference Ken Wilber's work, like, states are inherently temporary. They're peak moments or like sleeping, waking, happy, sad, whatever emotional state, right? They come and they go. They're inherently temporary. On the other side, you have stages, which are more or less permanent shifts in somebody's reality, right? Some permanent shifts, permanent demarcation points in someone's psychospiritual development. And so flow states are inherently transitory. Flow consciousness is like the lasting experience of flow, and even more than just peak performance orientation, right? Flow consciousness is much more about the Tao, right? For lack of a better term, wu wei, effortless action. Like how do we live from this higher stage of consciousness and imbue it into everything that we do at all times? And it's really, in how I like to describe it, is like it's an accelerated path to living your full potential, or it's a new operating system for your mind, for your consciousness, that allows you to live in a more expanded and abundant and fulfilling reality. So it's a whole operating system that you kind of download and then, changes everything. You put a new operating system on your phone, you have a completely new set of features, a completely new set of everything. It does more things than it did previously. So it's kind of akin to that.
Mm-hmm. Great. So I suppose it might be a bit more of an expanded view of flow than maybe some people are used to. in putting it in the context of just peak performance, or that it being this, this state of performance that you get to and it's kind of out there. But I suppose relating to it in a way of Wu Wei and the Tao, it's peeling back the layers that kind of uncover a kind of inherent and natural state that actually is there within us.
Absolutely. That's what you spoke to in the poem as well. So really flow is accessing and living from your true nature, which is infinite and limitless. So peeling back the Maya, the illusion of the ego and all of the layers of this distorted identity that we carry, the programming conditioning that keeps us limited and holds us back from living in our optimal potential. So really, it's a process of subtraction. A lot of people are like, oh, I have to learn more, do more, be more. And it's quite the opposite. It's really an unraveling of all of the things that aren't the truth of who you are, to operate from that place. And the more you can rest in that and live from that place, then you are being in flow consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And they're not mutually exclusive either, too. Again, they're on the same spectrum. And like the more you're in flow states, the more likely you're to experience flow consciousness. And the more you're in flow consciousness, the more likely you're to experience flow states. So they
have more peak experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I would maybe relate it also to, for me, the relationship with, say, the practice of meditation and then the state of consciousness of mindfulness, or being in a state of maybe meta-awareness. Meditation, and I suppose more so the meditative state that one hopes to be in meditation. Sometimes we get stuck in the doing of meditation itself, but the meditative state within meditation is the cultivation of a kind of metacognitive awareness, or a higher awareness of the subjective, the objective, and the space between. But it is that state of awareness that we're actually aiming to cultivate, that we're hoping leaves us when we step off from our meditation cushion. And so it's a similar thing in a sense, is these experiences of flow are, they can be temporary, but the aim is to peel back the layers enough so that we can then access them with greater grace, maybe.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Jackie, yourself, how did flow come up for you, or how did you find it?
Yeah, I would say my mentors in life were life itself and death. So really just being on this deep journey of unraveling ancestral patterns, these patterns of trauma and addiction in my lineage, that for some reason I came in very clear that I was the one to end it in my family. And so committing to that and studying psychology and Eastern wisdom from the time I was a teenager, and really from this place of, I'm broken. I want to fix myself. There's all of these things that aren't working in my life, and I don't want to be this way anymore. So very much from that place early on. And the death of my brother in 2009 was a huge catalyst for me, and really looking at my life to see what was out of alignment, and just went on a profound journey of healing and transformation. And, like Justin, I've encountered many teachers and guides along the way, and methodologies and modalities that helped me shift into this place of emotional freedom, and this place where I seemed to manifest anything that I said, and just coming into this place where I knew that life was conspiring in my favor. And I was living from this place so consistently that people started to ask me, how do I do it? And could I show them how? Could I teach them? And I didn't really know. So I had to work to reverse engineer it and come up with all of the best practices and things that supported me to come to this place. And one day, the idea, I used to work with children with autism. So I was trying to find where the crossover was between working with kids with autism and doing this deep transformational work. And the idea came to me when I was working on a tech incubator in Chile and working with these high functioning individuals with Asperger's, and just seeing that they were so deeply in what, I don't know where the word came from. It was just like a download, that these programmers and engineers are in a flow state as they're coding, and they just, are in it for days and forget to eat, forget to shower, don't go home, don't call their wives, or like in a dark basement, like at the computer. And so I started researching flow. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi came across all of the different people doing work in flow states. And I realized that something was missing. And I felt like I was living in this flow that, it didn't seem like this temporary moment. And so I worked to figure out how I got there. And then Justin and I crossed paths in a pretty synchronistic way. And here we are.
Mm-hmm. Love it. Yeah, I was going to ask as well how you both came to flow together, how that has evolved. And maybe we'll also touch in on your relationship and the experiences of flow maybe in your relationship or not at times. And so how you together practice flow relationally in the space between you as well. But I'm curious about I suppose a question for me that often comes up is, I'm invited to notice the layers and peel back the layers more and more as I deepen into a kind of creative pursuit. So writing a book for me in the last couple of years has been such a confronting and incredibly liberating mirror to the ways in which I am literally in the way of, maybe you would say, creation herself coming through me. And so in the act of a deeply vulnerable creative pursuit, in a sense, you're invited to recreate yourself on the way. And so I suppose a question is, or an inquiry is everybody who is, I suppose, creatively abundant or creatively alive or creatively in flow, must they be doing the work as well then? Or so in a way, is everyone who is creatively abundant or creatively alive, are they all doing this work of peeling back the layers? Or what's the difference between, say, someone who might be creatively in flow, but they're not sitting in meditation every day and they're not signing up to many self-development workshops and really doing the work, but they're still just creatively abundant? Like, what's the space between those two realities?
Yeah. That's a really interesting question.
Many layers.
Yeah. But I would say, like, in really like trying to hone in on what you're saying, that I think the difference is if they're like operating in a place of limitation, or a place of, or rather, maybe let me put it this way: are they operating beyond their growth edge or within what is known? Because essentially, like, there's definitely artists that have no conception of anything that we're talking about and are clearly operating in flow. And then there's and the same thing could be said about artists that are have no idea of anything that we're referencing or talking about, any of us here in this conversation, and are absolutely not in flow. I mean, there's a paradox in flow because you can't not be in flow. Flow is the nature of reality on some level. And so we like to distinguish between struggle flow and effortless flow, so people can understand like which end of that spectrum that they're at. So, there's that. I would add that in as like, a little asterisk there. But then there's people who are, I'm like drawing an integral quadrant here. Then there's people who are who are definitely in flow, but also cut off from their creativity. And there's people that are definitely in flow, but are super creative too. And so I would say that, like, if people are consistently pushing the boundaries of what's possible for them, and they're in that space of actual growth, they will naturally engage flow. But if they're trapped by the confines of their own worldview, and they're not willing to go beyond what is known for them, then they will ultimately limit their flow. Not that they can't be in flow, but there'll be a glass ceiling until they're ready to penetrate back into the mystery.
Yeah, I would say also that, so many people we find working with people, they'll have one area of their life really dialed in. So maybe their creativity is really there, but then they can't get their finances in order, or the relationships, or whatever it is. So they could be really deeply attuned to flow in one aspect, but also, it depends on how people came into this world. There's definitely people who are older souls and have done this before and have less to unravel. There's people who had incredible parenting and schooling so that they weren't given so many confines to begin with. So it depends on so many factors and what limitations and conditioning someone took on that will affect their ability to, there's so many people that are deeply, deeply spiritual or living this way, but don't have the terminology. They don't know they're doing it. They're just in it. So yeah, it depends on a lot of different factors.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, many sociological factors as well. And I suppose a vantage point that, and as a way to hold compassion for those of us who maybe do have this aspiration for a kind of flow that does feel like abundant and effortless living, where we feel fulfillment in the act of practicing itself rather than the attainment of something on the other side of the practice. Compassion for the fact that we've lived in a dominant culture that has us peg our worth up against our work for so long, and to question, well, to really draw hard lines and edges around that soft, tender nature within us, which is in many cases the fuel for our creation. And so I suppose to have compassion for the fact that it might not come naturally to many of us who are listening to this. It might take a little bit of... I would put a
distinction that it does come naturally. We've just forgotten,
veered off.
Or it's been conditioned out of us. It's totally natural. We all have this innate inborn capacity. So it's not like you have to be some rare, exceptional person to have this. It's all there. There's just some things in the way.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like we're all born into the world, and our self is created in relationship with the world in a way. And then we bring that self to the world. And there's the pre-reflective self, which is just all of our taken for grantedness and all of the things that we carry that we've inherited through either disposition or culturally and socially. And then it takes us to become reflective, to kind of develop that metacognition around that which we're carrying. And so, yeah, I suppose just a note to say that we have lived in a dominant culture that has distanced us very much so from this inherent flow that is always there. So what are some of the like the core yearnings or impulses, inquiries, questions, challenges that people do sign up to, say, Flow Mastery for, or come to you with questions around? Is it, finances, relationships, purposeful living? Like, what are some of the core challenges that you find people are seeking flow around?
Yeah, well, definitely, like we kind of know because we ask people. So we have like some hard data on this. So we're not just guessing. But, it really, I'd say there's like 3 or 4 main categories. And the biggest one by far is people have the metacognition. They're aware that they have self-doubt, fear, anxiety, limiting beliefs, et cetera, things that are obviously creating undesirable conditions in their experience of life and reality. And so that's the number one thing that people come, is to kind of defrag their mind, their emotions, and get out of their own way. But after that, in a close second, and this probably, harkens to your dominant culture comments, is that the next thing is usually money. People want to have more abundance because that's, tied on some level in this reality to one of the most existential needs, which is freedom. And so like money can enable freedom and choice and self-expression and all that stuff. And so a lot of people come for that. And then after that, then there's the next biggest category, is people that like really genuinely get what flow is, and they want more. They've experienced it, and they want to be in effortlessness. They've tasted the nectar, and they're like, yeah, this is it, man. And then it kind of like trails off into like everything else after that, all the other things you can possibly think of.
I would say too, people who are really inspired to live their passion and purpose, and they're either not sure entirely what that is, or they have a vision and a purpose that's so big that it scares them, and they don't know how they're ever going to be able to do it. So that's where they're seeing all of the limitations and beliefs that might be in the way, and they have this tremendous vision. So the people that we work with tend to be people who have already gone really deep and have done a lot of work, or a lot of facilitators of the work as well. And so people that already have a really high level of understanding and really want to dial it in and take it to the next level.
So they're already kind of gone from pre-contemplation to, you might say, the contemplation stage of kind of a change process, where they have that metacognition that there is something here that there might be an invitation to become aware of and move with in some way. So they're already
generally
there.
Yeah, we work with all types of people, but that's the type of people that we generally work with the most.
And I would say like the main key is people that are interested in personal growth and self-realization. Like that is the unifying theme. And that spans like a huge spectrum too, because it may be people that have never engaged any really like deep, serious introspection, but they know that if, they master their mindset or whatever it is, like their life gets better, And so there's this big spectrum. And I think that's kind of unique to what we do is we try and keep the language and the way we present things really universal. We're pretty like aware of like how people perceive different types of language and different things like that. And so like, it's really, anybody can just plug in, if you have an open mind, like boom, just plug in and it'll just, take you to the next level.
Yeah. I'm wondering if we could do a little example just for those who, and I might use myself in say the beginning of a writing journey, for those who do feel like they're on the edge, or they do hold that, resonated with what you said before, Jackie, a big vision, something that's exciting and also fucking daunting at the same time. And so where would you begin? I know you mentioned around like psychodynamic restructuring and then neurobiological kind of rewiring as well. Where would you begin in a process if someone came to you and said, I have this big idea, or I'm trying to create something of impact. I feel pulled by a vision, but I feel so stagnant and stuck and alone. Yeah, what would be your first ways of meeting them and guiding them?
Yeah. So we have two aspects of flow, the inner flow and outer flow. And we say that inner flow is about 60% of flow, and that's doing the deep inner reprogramming work that you just spoke to. And the outer flow is the principles that help guide you in all of the actions you're taking, the decisions you're making. And so a good place to start, especially, so if you're taking on this creative writing project or something and just noticing what's coming up for you, seeing what's alive in you as you're putting pen to paper or sitting at your keyboard, and noticing what hesitations there, what resistance, what frustration, what doubts, what thoughts you're having, what different emotional experiences that are there. So then you could start to dig down. We do a mindful questioning process, and we work with people to identify the beliefs that are getting in the way from them doing what it is they want to do. So, what comes up for you as you're now facing this huge growth edge of putting this into the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so it's through a kind of appreciative inquiry and just constantly, would journaling be a big aspect of that as well, possibly, to develop, the metacognition of these are the, I suppose, animating beliefs behind this hesitation to put pen to paper, or so any kind of self-reflective process.
Yeah. I mean, like to build on that, like what Jackie said, and to kind of include your question too, is like, because really what I'm hearing is like, how does one know like what the next move is to be, to go in deeper into flow, or to like, fulfill this desire to create a project or whatever it is. And it's like, there's a circular, there's different aspects and layers to it. And you kind of have to like, just look at all these different things and say, okay, what applies here? Based on my circumstances right now, what applies here? And it could be introspective inner work. That's often part of it. Like 60% of the time, that's often part of it. But then there's also times when it's like, people can get imbalanced. Like, people like honoring the balance that's required to be in flows. Like a lot of times people will be doing inner work all day because it's easy for them to stay in their comfort zone, and they can stay at home and they don't have to go out in the big scary world and face their fears, and they can just work on them under the covers, right? And so for people that have been doing a lot of inner work, they may need to go out in the world and take action, inspired action, and apply some of the other aspects and principles of flow. So it's always going to be really unique to a person, and like where their life is at. Like what have they been doing? What have they been doing too little of? What have they been doing too much of? What have they been ignoring? What have they been overemphasizing, right? And so journaling is always going to be helpful in the introspective process, and anytime that you can kind of go in and like see what's operating under the surface is going to provide like really interesting data. And so that's always like worthwhile. But I think that also, there's a lot to be said about action and just, a rapid prototype, just going out there and doing something and see what happens, And so it's this dynamic balance between the inner and the outer that we're always trying to like find the sweet integrated point of that will get you into the highest amount of flow. And like, that's the point for people like that we've been talking about, like that they want to ride as they go about creating whatever it is they're creating or birthing whatever it is they're birthing, because that's the point at which you stay in the highest flow and you don't burn out or take too much risk or too little risk or whatever it is.
Yeah. And really dialing in the vision for what it is that you want. So, whether it's for this book or for all aspects of your life, a lot of people, might only think about what they want to do for their career or something, but no, getting really crystal clear on what you want for all areas of your life and holding that vision, and then really taking the steps to actually energize that and take inspired action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can hear, which is a question I wanted to touch on as well, intuition and the difference between, say, what's the difference between an unconscious intrapsychic, I suppose, fear or thought that comes up and we kind of disguise it as intuition, or we might call it intuition and I'm just following my intuition, but actually it's just something that we haven't really acknowledged within ourselves yet. So what's the discernment between intuition and those aspects of ourselves that maybe we haven't become aware of or integrated, but also the point of discernment, to be able to discern that now is actually, for me to be in that state of balance or flow or integrity, journaling right now is what I need. But then to also say that, no, I've been fucking journaling for 3 hours. Now what am I avoiding? I have to get up and fucking do something. Like that discernment and the ability to kind of ride the upward shift, you might call it, like to listen to, in a way, evolution wanting to take place through oneself, to listen to that upward shift and to say, right, I'm just riding this now as an avoidance pattern, and to have the discernment to say, actually, I need to move enough sitting down, meditating. How would you support someone in, because I suppose that's when you then become your own compass, you become your own guidance system.
Right. Totally. That's the name of the game, is to that's the name of the game, to have the compass so that you always know which way is north, which way is south. And I think that, like, what you're talking about is really the elephant in the room at all times. This gets at the heart of, like, how do we navigate this crazy ass reality that we just popped out into? Like,
these are the conversations I want to be having.
And it's like the most fundamental layer of intuition is what is intuition and what is not intuition. That is the ultimate thing that somebody needs to be able to discern to be able to live in intuition and to really go into the highest levels of flow. And so there's a really cool distinction that we like to share around intuition, and to understand when it is and when it isn't intuition. And the essence of it is really that intuition is a feeling. Intuition does not have a judgment on reality. Intuition is a feeling, and a feeling is different than an emotion. An emotion is a feeling that's been taken and pulled through the filter of our beliefs, our perceptions, and now it's colored. And it's giving additional layers of meaning that are now taking it away from just like the pure somatic experience of the feeling. But that pure feeling is what the intuition is. And so that whenever you're experiencing emotion, you're already one step removed from intuition. And so you have to start to be careful. And like one of the things that we teach people to do is like get into a meditative state where you have quieted, your emotions and you're really centered, and then feel into it, because then you're going to get a much clearer read than if you're trying, if you're all stressed out or overly excited or whatever it is, and then trying to figure out what's what.
Mm-hmm. And also too, this is where the inner work is critical, because if you have a lot of unresolved emotions, trauma, and the noise in your nervous system, it's going to be hard to differentiate what is that purely felt sensation and what is this distortion. So having that foundation of inner work makes it much more easy to access, what is this subtle energy in my body? And like you said, intuition is the compass, and that's really what allows us to thrive in times of uncertainty, mm-hmm. And our intuition is nonlinear. It helps us make these quantum leaps. And when our rational mind can only see a sliver of possibility based on our limiting beliefs and what we think is possible, it's like we have blinders on. And so we're looking for the way forward, in this really linear way, whereas our intuition may tell us to do something that doesn't make sense, but it's always going to be the guide to the next best thing for you.
Yeah, which I suppose for me also brings up then the concept of time. like the ability for one to listen so keenly to the very subtle, nuanced feelings and to develop that sensitivity in one's body takes time. And time also, there's many times where I will sense an intuition and then I'll go to move. And as soon as I go to move, the mind kicks back in and, oh, that's silly. That's never going to work. He's going to think that's shit. He's going to think that's completely naive. And so it takes time again to return and constantly return to strengthen the kind of value and worth that we place on that aspect of ourselves, that deeper intuitive vein.
Well, and that's the thing is like we all have this innate intrinsic ability, right? This is our fundamental biological wiring. But along the way, it's conditioned out of us. It's not, our society values logic, reason, this, kind of practical, rational way of seeing the world, which there's definite value in that at times too. So it's not to say that you're never going to use those, but we all have this ability and we learn not to trust it. So actually, the essence of intuition is just reading this subtle energy, which is pretty simple. But the challenge is, can you trust it? Can you trust it when it's telling you to do something that really conflicts with what your logical, rational mind is saying? That's really where the work comes in. And it's a muscle that you develop. It's something that you build over time. And the more that you do it, the more you're able to trust it. And the more you get to make bigger and bigger decisions from that place.
Yeah. And also too, like one of the core essences and teachings of flow is integration. And so I think that there's this like battle in society, and especially like in conscious spiritual community, psychotherapy oriented community, like head versus heart, which one's better? And it's like, or, intuition versus logic, which one's better, know? And it's like, you need both, that's why we have both. It's because, nature didn't make a mistake. We need both. But the key though, is to let intuition lead and let intuition double check the thinking, right? The feelings will give you the actual calibration to whether your thinking is correct or incorrect. And, and intuition is like the wrong tool to do when you need to have super high precision. I mean, it can get there. You can get it there. You can get it to a place where it's super high precision, but like, if you're kind of doing broad strokes with your taxes, the government might not like that. And you might have some stuff come to catch up with you, but that's why, but still you let your intuition lead. Okay. It's time to do the taxes. Your intuition tells you it's time to do the taxes. Hey, maybe you should double check the bank account because you missed a line that actually, that had a significant amount of deductions on it. Right. But then when you're actually like recording it and you're actually going about it, you'll use your rational intellect to do that because it's a way better tool for it than your intuition, which is much more broad stroke, So people ultimately want to use both. But when you look at from a neuroscience perspective, when you look at the raw processing power of intuition, it's millions of times more powerful. It can process millions of times more data per second than your rational mind can, your conscious mind. So to use it for anything else but to be in service of intuition that's when people get into trouble, because then you start to do what Jackie was saying, where you narrow the view, the lens that you're looking at reality down to this little box, and you think you see everything, and you don't see it. You see less than 1% of everything, and that's when you get into trouble. But that's how we've been living in our culture, is that like literally everybody's looking through this lens and being like, "No, I see everything. Trust me, I see everything. This is good. We're good." And then and now we have an incredible level of technological advancement that's built on systems that completely destroy the planet. Because whoops, we didn't notice that was happening.
Yeah. Like we only chose one color in the kaleidoscope to focus on. Yeah. And now everything's red. Pretty boring. But like I suppose it is the dissonance between maybe the map and the territory in another kind of terminology. And the aim is to kind of broaden the map to encompass more of the territory, which you might call human condition or reality, full stop. And to do that is to include all of it, but also to, I suppose, have that level of discernment to kind of be the puppeteer who's puppeting, like, now it's time for intuition, now it's time for rationale, now it's time for emotion. I'm sitting with someone who's in a process, to be able to have that level of freedom, really, in the way that we navigate all our faculties is beautiful and much needed. But on the notion of trust and learning to trust intuition, it's something that, I mean, community plays a massive part in, and having those around you who are on a similar journey to you. And so having a learning community, I'm curious how you've found, or how you've maybe adjusted the way that you run your programs in the way of really making sure you foster that kind of sense of strong emotional intimacy and psychological safety and the community in this process when people are going through quite a liminal stage in their lives, and they are opening up to parts of themselves that maybe they've either distanced themselves from or had quite an imbalanced relationship to for quite some time. How do you facilitate community through your programs for this deeply transformative and vulnerable process?
Yeah. So we have, we do, our trainings are evergreen now, but we do live monthly calls. We just did one the other day, and we went for like 2 hours and really just go deep with people and make them feel held in that space. And so everyone's going through it, people at various levels of the program, or even different levels, different modules, but also different levels of the programs. But yet people are still coming together because it's so critical, as you're saying, to have people that are on that same wavelength. And especially as you're shifting into new paradigms and breaking the mold and stepping out of the matrix, people start to see that relationships that they've had no longer resonate. They don't feel in alignment anymore. Jobs that they have, communities that they belong to, sometimes things start to shift and it doesn't feel like a fit anymore. And that can feel scary for people unless they have a community of people that are on that same wavelength. And so we have people all over the world in over 40 countries. We're doing a community connection call in a few weeks to really just have people get to know each other in the group, especially during this time where people feel so isolated and alone, to really just get to know other people that are on the same journey. And then we have Facebook communities for them so they can get support and ask questions and share their wins in a place where they can be celebrating their success, because a lot of people feel like they can't do that because other people will tear them down, or other people just don't understand what they're going through. So to be able to celebrate their wins, but also be held in the mess, is really important.
Yeah. That's one thing that we learned pretty quick, is that, people are going under such massive shifts in their worldview, hence their identity. And so, that needs a lot of support. If people honor their own pace as they go through this process, whether it's with us or on their own or whatever, then usually it's pretty stable. But, sometimes people get excited and want to move really fast. And we're always like, slow and steady, trust us, and really having that community that shares the worldview. And it is still a niche, as you know, probably more than anyone, is living in this way, on this wavelength, which is really what is at the evolution of our culture, but definitely not the mainstream of our culture. There's walking around the streets, you might be hard pressed to find someone that shares your worldview. So to have that community where you can go and be like, okay, like it's the coronavirus and everyone's lost in fear. And you know what? I feel really good right now. And I feel safe saying that here because I can see through it. And I know that the transcendental nature of my being is untouched by this, and that the nocebo effect is real. And so it's better for me to stay in the truth of my own health and all that stuff. So to have a community where people can get that support, whether it's with us or in general, is so key. As you know more than anyone, in deep transformational work, like to have it be witnessed and to also have that support, people really understand you, and you don't end up feeling more isolated as a result of going through it.
Yeah. And then there's a journey of, what we see, and, I've definitely gone through this and still at times, when you have these awakenings and these deep truths that you're carrying and you feel so free, there's a tendency to want to bring everyone into it. And so some people might not be ready for that. And so people will bring it to their friends, to their family, and try to change them. And that doesn't usually work and often creates a bigger rift. So it's like then coming back to loving acceptance of people and meeting them where they are on their journey and allowing that to be okay. And so being able to hold multiple perspectives, which I think at this time is so necessary, especially, in the time of the coronavirus. There's so many different perspectives, so many different worldviews. Everyone's tearing each other apart. And, communities that were once really loving and supportive, people are attacking each other with these opposing views. And the work is really being able to hold all of the perspectives. And, you said at the beginning of the call something about being okay in the not knowing and not having to have all of the answers, but how can you hold the space for all of the perspectives and allow other people to be in what they believe and not having to, bring everyone along on your journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in a sense, it's learning to live in paradox, and in a way that being a gateway to flow. Like, to not be in flow is to have an aspect of one's experience rubbing up against something in reality that's creating a kind of friction, in my experience. And so to learn to live in the paradox, to learn to live in the fact that I am deeply independent and I do have a sense of self and I do have creative agency, and also I'm deeply dependent and I don't know anything at all, really. And I require others to dance with me. So to be able to navigate paradox with grace is a kind of, it's deeply vulnerable, hence the, I suppose, the medicine and community in that journey. But it's also in a lot of this, I suppose, self-transformative and liberating work is softening into those more tender, nuanced aspects of the self, such as intuition, such as the heart, such as the sensitivity of the body, which is deeply vulnerable. And then out of that want to share it with others, it can actually be deeply dangerous because we're sharing something that has been very shy for a very long time and is very tender. And so to be selective almost with who we do share it with, like those people need to earn the ability to hear our vulnerability. They need to earn the ability to hold that aspect of ourselves that we're just starting to come into. And so it's kind of a softening to take place, to soften into those parts of ourselves, but also at the very same time, a strengthening to have the discernment to say, I'm not going to share that with you actually, because I get a sense that I'm not going to be heard in that. And that's not supportive of my growth process.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I suppose bringing this into group flow and the notion of group flow, I'm curious, between both of you, are there, like in your creative process, when you're either iterating on the course or designing a new one, how do you both enter a kind of creative flow as two individuals with your own perceptions of what should be and what could be? Yeah. How do you navigate flow together?
Yeah. We pretty much just, fight it out. And
yeah, I can
pull hair.
Yeah, whoever hits the floor first, they lose.
Yeah.
I think, Jackie and I, we're both projectors in human design. So it's like, we kind of have the same settings, but like we're pointing in slightly different directions, but it's actually good because, I feel like we never we don't really have a process. It's crazy to say if we literally just are so oriented to intuition and just in our own flows together that it kind of produces this third element that, is the business and what we do.
But that's the thing too, is now as we're scaling the business and working on creating a teacher training, we're like, oh, well,
yeah.
How do we dissect this process that is so intuitive and just kind of happens so organically as we're, because we're both so calibrated to our own intuitive process and our own creative process. And when we're operating in our gifts and our genius, that's the greatest thing. I notice if I'm trying to be like Justin and do the things that he does so intuitively well, I, come up against all of these edges and all of my fears and things. And I'm like, but that's just not how I operate. And so when I remember that and come back to my genius and how I operate, things flow so much better. So yeah, we've been in this place of having to look at how does this work? And how do we pick it apart so then we could then teach other people to do it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because again, like you say, it's like the paradox of like, okay, you definitely want to play to your strengths, but then if you only play to your strengths, then you end up limiting yourself. Yeah. So there's this like kind of dynamic growing edge where it's like you play to your strengths and you pull your strengths in the direction that they haven't gone yet. And it's like, and so, so we try and like our main motto and our main overarching theme is like, and this is really the nature of flow itself, is like dynamic structure, or flexible structure, which is like, reminds me of Bucky Fuller's
like water.
Security balls. Yeah, exactly. It's like, it's kind of like, it's like water, water changes between ice and just being in its fluid state as needed, or even gas. And it's like, okay, cool. How do we develop structures that allow that to happen while also being agile and focused and, getting things done? So it's a huge.
The river needs the banks in order to be able to flow. So there is that balance of the masculine and the feminine, and having the structure to allow you to flow. And it's a dance. It really is a dance. And like you said, everything's really paradoxical in nature. So how can you be fluid in that?
Yeah. But I suppose as a facilitator, just thinking about, say, leaders in teams who are really wanting to, I mean, in this time, it's a great example that our adaptability and our agility as a team and as a group of humans is incredibly vital in order to adapt to our times. But a lot of, I mean, if you look at, say, the Sinefan model, when the environment becomes complex or chaotic, the default narrative is to, I suppose, become more rigid, to secure safety, to create more systems and more processes. But in fact, that's the opposite of what we need. We need more fluidity. We need more spontaneity, more emergence. Or a facilitator of a group or a leader or a manager to be able to trust in that process requires them to be exercising this in their own world, in their own lives.
Completely. It's always coming back to the balance point and hovering as near to the balance point as you can, So it's like, if things are too chaotic and fluid, you're going to need to bring it back into balance by imposing some more structure. But then if you go too far to the other end and impose too much structure, then it's going to be too rigid. Then you're going to have to bring it back into balance and add more fluidity and flow to it. So it's like, it's always coming back to the balance point and trying to live as closely to that as possible. You're never going to be always there, but just kind of vacillating between, rather than going from extreme to extreme.
Yeah. And I think this too really paints a picture of like why we're so focused on intuition though, because intuition is, structure and fluid agnostic. It's only concerned with what's optimal. That's it. It doesn't care really whether you use one or the other. And so, when you put intuition front and center, you'll get structure where you need structure. And then the intuition will examine that structure and say, when does the structure need to change? When has it gone constrictive? And you'll know because your intuition will feel constrictive about the thing that it's looking at. And so, if you're Boeing and you're going to build an extremely complicated jet, you're going to have a process, but that process needs to be iterated, and the intuition is going to tell you when to iterate. It's going to tell you when to have the meeting to say, hey, maybe there's a way we can improve this. Or somebody that's working in that process might be like, hey, I've intuitively figured that this is better. I just know from my experience, this is better. It feeds that back to, leadership, and leadership goes, okay, this is great. And then it's that flexible dynamic structure that allows it to be agile. I mean, that's really what agility is. It's funny that, it's approached so rationally a lot of times, but it's like agility is that perfect balance between the two and trying to constantly track that. And intuition's the key. And even the research shows it, I think most of the most successful entrepreneurs on the planet have now been on the record saying that intuition was key. Jeff Bezos just came out and said it the other day. Love or hate him for all the other things he does. Nonetheless, it's pretty impressive what they've built. Intuition was front and center for him. He's on the record saying that now. Same thing for Steve Jobs.
Naveen Jain.
Same thing for Einstein. Einstein wasn't necessarily an entrepreneur, but like like literally people who have reached the highest levels of pinnacle and success and entrepreneurial performance, like all are like, yeah, intuition is critical, because the decision making gets so complex at that level that you can't rationally assess it. You have to like literally tune into your intuition to understand what the best move forward is.
But that's the mark of a great facilitator too. And you know this better than anyone, the ability to read the room and feel the energy and what's needed, because people create these experiences and these retreats generally overscheduled and have too much there because they want to cater to what they think people want, and holding that too tightly and not allowing for what's in the room to be there and to pivot and iterate based on what's showing up and what you're tracking is going to be a bottleneck for the experience. So really being able to be attuned relationally and bring the group into coherence is deeply connected to your intuitive ability.
Yeah. And it's, I suppose in my experience of facilitating rooms as well, it's really trusting, like I always, a mantra for me before I either step on stage or into a room is that we are friends. We are friends. Everyone in the room and me, we're friends. That's great in multiple ways. Firstly, it helps me soothe the fact that I don't need to be a teacher here. I'm just here to share in a human story that everyone's part of. And secondly, it helps me understand that it's very likely that what I'm experiencing in my body through mirror neurons is what many people in the room are experiencing. And so if I'm in touch with the very subtle nature of my experience here as a facilitator, and I have the courage to name it or to allow that to inform my decisions in the room, it's very likely that other people are going to just have a big exhale at the end saying, oh, fuck, I'm glad that he didn't go ahead with that exercise or that thing, because we were all feeling super fucking tired and wound up from that last exercise. To trust,
and that builds so much trust between the facilitator and the group, because it's like, wow, you see me, you really get me.
Yeah.
And when you're not attuned to that, it's like, oh my God, does he not see what's going on here?
He's just doing
We're
this for himself.
Dying for a bio break. We, our eyes are glazing over and nobody noticed.
Yeah, exactly. So I suppose just in reflecting and pulling together that's something that feels kind of practical for those who are listening, obviously strengthening our ability to sense into and start to relate to our intuition, and therefore the body, like really moving top down to becoming, I suppose, a little bit more sensitive to the micro movements of our body and also our feeling body. What would you say is, and maybe this is something that you practice for yourself, but also a practice that you offer for students and participants, what is a practice that you would offer to somebody to strengthen that relationship to intuition?
Yeah, well, one of my favorite ones is really just taking on kind of like an experimenter's mindset and saying, like, wake up in the morning and say, okay, today I'm not going to think my way through the day. Today I'm going to just pay attention to how I feel. Every decision that I'm aware of that I'm making, what do I feel about it? Like, and let that be the guiding force, and paying attention to that, like just reorienting things from the constant stream of thoughts into like, what does my body feel right now? Oh, how does this shirt feel on me? Ooh, I need to eat something now. What feels good, right? And that trains that muscle. That's the equivalent of like intuitional powerlifting. You know what I mean? That's like hitting the intuitional treadmill and putting it on 26 miles, and going for it. And that really just really rapidly builds the skill of intuition, because you start to reorient to the part of you that lets you know when you're in it or not,
I would add also, for me, I had a lot of trauma and a numbness, and I actually couldn't feel for many years in my life because that was my defense mechanism. So I needed to learn how to feel sensations and feel emotions again. So just isolating the different senses and really learning to tune into them. So if you blindfold yourself and really like pay attention to hearing and hearing, just, right now I hear someone banging a pan, and there's a bird chirping outside, and the hum of the dryer, just attuning to all of the different sounds in the environment and playing with each of your different senses will strengthen your ability to actually feel and notice subtle energies in your body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great. So just broadly, I was becoming more attuned and subtly aware to the sensations. And that might mean, taking away our visual sense, which for many of us and evolutionarily is one that we rely on very heavily. So simply, I suppose in meditation, pratyahara, withdrawal of the senses and closing down your visual field could be a useful exercise. Even, as you said, Justin, throughout the day, just asking and inquiring, what am I feeling? But maybe also closing down the eyes in that time to really take the awareness inwards.
Yeah, totally.
And just doing body scans and becoming aware of the somatic experience in your body throughout the day, just checking in, doing these intuitive body check-ins and like, what am I noticing? What am I present to? Whatever sensations are in the body throughout the day, just to train yourself to pay attention to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's so much stuff. Literally like this question, there's just endless amount of things you can do to optimize your reality for intuition and flow and stuff. So, but like even though what we shared maybe sounds really simple and like, well, that's it. It's like, it's really highly leveraged. Like really, if you do that, like there's a lot of gain for every minute spent doing what we're talking about,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yeah, it's something we can all do. And I suppose in this time during what for many of us is a period of discontinuity, whether it's our roles or shifting and in relationships and also in work, paying attention to our intuition is maybe more important than ever right now. And also, as we noted in the beginning, now is just a bit of maybe an amplification of the nature of reality as it is day to day anyway.
Yeah, now and always.
Yeah, so it would be a great opportunity to practice things like this, because in times of rapid change, we kind of notice our default tendency, whether it's to swing towards hope and having maybe an imaginary sense of a hopeful future, just to guard ourselves from the vulnerability of the fact that it may not turn out that way. Or we swing towards heartbreak and a sense of helplessness. So we all will swing or orient towards one side of a paradox in this time. And so it's useful to maybe practice this feeling during these swings to build that meta-awareness. As we start to close off, are there any last or leaving statements, offerings, invitations to people, again, maybe specific to this time, knowing also that it's for all time, but in their pursuit of deepening their experience of flow, of intuition and effortless living? Any last leaving comments?
I would say in this time and at all times, the invitation is there to really go within. And the deeper we're willing to go into the depths of the feelings that we don't want to experience, whether it's sadness, anger, fear, shame, guilt, all of these things that we've been conditioned to turn away from and stuff down and numb out and escape, the more we're able to be with them and allow them and to go into them, on this other side of that is freedom, bliss, joy, flow. So really taking this time as an invitation and always to see what's there and to go within and keep doing the work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I would say on the edge of that, like, everything's changed and nothing's changed. The things that really matter haven't changed. And so it's best, in my opinion, what I would invite people to do is to focus on what's true and what's always true, and the things that are important no matter what's going on in life, and you can't really go wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So where can people connect with you, find out more about Flow Mastery and the Flow Consciousness Institute? Yeah, where's the best place for people to head?
Flowconsciousness.com is the home for our research and training programs. And then feel free to connect with us on all the socials.
Yeah. There's more and more content that we're posting there too. There's people want to go deeper on these wavelengths that we talked about, curious about different ways to optimize their mind, their reality for flow. There's lots of goodies there on all these places. And if you want to know, just start into Google Flow Consciousness and you'll see us. So
Brilliant. Well, we could have definitely kept on going, like the whole realm of psychedelia and
Oh yeah, that's
leadership.
part 2.
There are so many different threads that we can and maybe will go down someday. But thank you both very much for taking the time, for sharing from your perspective, your philosophy. And yeah, look forward to connecting again sometime shortly.
Our deepest pleasure.
Beautiful. Thanks for having us, man. Always a pleasure to chat.
What questions are still whirring inside for you? What landed and rung loudly for you? Let's take a moment. Thank you for joining me for another life-affirming and enriching conversation, each one a light, a torch to guide us on our path to being in right relationship with ourselves, those we walk with, and the ecologies we are very much a part of. I trust this has gifted you something to place in your toolkit to support you in your journey and your leadership. Make sure to connect with me and leave any comments on my Facebook or Instagram page at @ljeffrey, and check out the links in the show notes. This show is completely funded by listeners just like you, so if you feel generous and wish to be part of nourishing these inquiries that we're exploring together, you can leave a once-off donation or soon subscribe to my Patreon membership. Show notes, resources, and donations are all at www.spacesbetweenpodcast.com. Until next time, remember, we can't rush our way back. Notice connections and tend to the sweet, sweet spaces between. Lots of love.